in Baltimore. Happy conversation with this guy. Sure, the Orioles have won a game or two here or there, and certainly those days that now feel like months ago where they came back and had a little something magic happens against the Pittsburgh Pirates 2 weeks ago and about 37 years too late or whatever it was. Luke Jones now joins us after a happy road trip to Tampa, Luke, and, at some point, they're bound to win a series or two. I mean, even though it took them 2.5 months, and the pitching wasn't particularly stellar over the weekend, but hard to argue with success, any success, especially when you haven't had any success, right?
Right, and you think about how the weekend started with Ubaldo Jimenez just being absolutely dreadful. I mean, so bad that I think many people, and admittedly myself included, turned the game off after the first couple innings because it was just one of those completely non-competitive games. And obviously, a 15-5 final? Yeah. I mean, you don't need to be Abner Doubleday to figure that out or anything. But the good news, albeit after tying the Major League record for 20 straight games with 5 or more runs allowed, so much fanfare, but fanfare probably not the right term, so much just embarrassment, negative attention, however you want to put it. The rest of the weekend, pretty good down in St. Petersburg. Dylan Bundy, a nice start for him on Saturday night as they finally break that stretch. The bats contributed in an 8-3 victory. And then Sunday, you look at the Sunday lineup, lots of non-regulars in the batting order for the Orioles.
Yeah, my wife's like, who's this Gentry guy, right?
Yeah, and it was strange, too. And typically you see that kind of lineup against the righty, and you're thinking automatic, well, Buck's looking at reverse splits. Now, Odorizzi had reverse splits in 2016, but this year not so much. So you kind of look at it, and you scratch your head a little bit. I mean, Caleb Joseph's starting fine, day game after a late afternoon game at the Trop on Saturday, but Gentry in there, Joey Rickard in there, and you're thinking, well, you got the B and C lineup in there, and sure enough, all of those guys contributed heavily to an Orioles comeback.
Hey, don't forget Paulie Yanish now. Come on, he knocked in a few. Come on.
Yeah, he did. I believe I saw a stat, his first multi-RBI game since 2012, which is speaks to the nature of him.
Or as I tweeted out, Paul Yanish is a 2-out RBI machine.
Yeah, right. He was on Sunday. So, so a nice road series victory, first one they've had in over 2 months. You have to go back to that Cincinnati series in April. And what does it mean? Well, see what happens next. It's one of those, when you have a stretch as bad as the Orioles have been for the better part of 6 weeks, you don't say anything's fixed after a win. You don't say anything's fixed after a series win. But you say, okay, on to the next one. See if you can do it again. And then you come home for the final series before the, or this next series where they come home. See if you can do it again. So it was good to see. Certainly, they had some good pitching performances. Bundy and the bullpen on Sunday really, really good in relief of Chris Tillman. But it's certainly, those issues are still there. They're not going away. But it was nice to see them come away with a road series win because, they've been on the stretch recently, but really all year long. I mean, they just have not played well on the road other than the first 3 weeks of the season they did all right. Since then, it's been miserable. So Tampa Bay had been playing pretty well, but now you look at the Orioles, they're a game below 500 going into the off day, and the rest of this division's playing pretty poorly right now. Yankees struggling big time. Boston lost the final 2 games over the weekend. Toronto, for as much as people were singing their praises for climbing back in it a few weeks back, they've hovered in that 1 to 3 games below 500 range for 3 weeks now, probably. So it doesn't look like they're making their move either. So as much as we talk about the Orioles' problems, and they are immense, there's no sugarcoating that when you have the kind of pitching that this team has suffered with all season. You still look at the rest of the division, you look at the wild card picture, and you just say, okay, well, I guess you see what happens over the next 3 or 4 weeks, and as those buyer-seller kind of conversations come into sharper focus. But in the short term, nice to see them get a road series win, long overdue.
All right, so, in taking this thing step by step on how they won the weekend, part of winning the weekend on Sunday was the bench, right? For a day, I remember the days when the Taylor Teagardens were winning games around here and the Ryan Flahertys were playing the role of hero. Not a bad place to be to have that going on a Sunday afternoon, but, then it takes us back to the star players. Adam Jones is getting hot. Machado, okay, I guess the jury is still out. But, there has been some coming and some going. Even Trumbo with some big hits here and again. Obviously, Scope's been on fire, hit another big bomb on Sunday. The bats have been part of this awakening over the weekend, and we always knew that was going to be part of it, that it wasn't going to be 7-inning, 3-hit shutout baseball from the pitching staff that wins games. It's going to be, we're going to give up 5, but we're going to score, 7, or we're going to score 8, as they did over the weekend. That's the way they're going to win baseball games, right?
Yeah, I mean, it looks that way. Unless Dylan Bundy's on the hill, and we've talked about it. At some point, they'll start pitching better. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be good, but better than this historic, embarrassing 3 weeks that they've experienced. They're not going to continue having a 7 or 8 ERA over a 2 or 3 week stretch. It's not going to be quite that bad, but you're right in the sense of if this team's going to win games, if this team's going to be anything better than mediocre, and I severely have my doubts even after this weekend, that doesn't change, but it's going to be because of their offense. And it was nice to see them get some contributions from some, quote, lesser players, because that's how you have to do it. I mean, over 162, and you said it, whether it was Taylor Teagarden or Ryan Flaherty didn't have too many big hits over the years, but guys like Steve Pearce coming out of nowhere the way he did a few years ago. I mean, you need some of that. And they have gotten that from Trey Mancini this year, who hit another home run on Sunday and continues to be just an unbelievable story in an otherwise pretty frustrating season.
Yeah, I mean, he's their Clark Judge. What am I saying? That's funny. Aaron Judge. I had Clark Judge on last week.
You wish it was Clark.
Yeah, Clark Kent maybe. Yeah, but I mean, Aaron Judge is, running away with this. If not, we would be looking at the stats of Trey Mancini and saying, hey, when's the last time we've had a rookie that we could sit here in late June and talk about with this kind of productivity when, I don't want to say it's unexpected, but nobody compares him to Machado or Wieters or Markakis or even Scope for that matter. He's just a guy, and he's just a guy right now on pace to hit hit 30 home runs and drive in 100 runs and hit 320. I mean, it's kind of an outrageous pace, quite frankly. We haven't seen anything like this from a power standpoint around here in a long, long time. I mean, Machado wasn't that good in the early going.
Yeah, and keep in mind, Manny was much younger, and Scope was the same way. Trey Mancini's a little bit older. He's 25 years old. This isn't a fresh-faced, lack of experience kind of rookie who only spent a year or two in the minors. I mean, this was a guy who spent extended time at every level. And, you don't see that much anymore. I mean, nowadays you have so many more guys that are like Machado or like Correa in Houston. I mean, guys that they spend a couple years in the minors, and they're up at age
20, I mean, if you 21. Can't get to the big leagues in 3 or 4 years after you're drafted, how many general managers, how many decision makers that drafted 2 weeks ago are going to be around 4 years from now to see a 18-year-old kid actually throw a ball in the big leagues? I mean, it doesn't happen often. That's why they're rushed. They're rushed because they're on that clock, right? I mean, and Mancini is the exception to the exception to the rule. You say you don't see it much anymore. I mean, you don't really see it at all anymore, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, you're talking about a guy who turned 25 in March. He was drafted in the 8th round out of Notre Dame. A college player who had a nice career, but certainly wasn't someone that was on anyone's radar other than the Orioles, really. So, that's as much as we beat up their player development, and so much of it is deserved, there's a success story for you. And, look, I don't think Trey Mancini is going to continue to hit 320 necessarily, but at the same time, I can remember you asking me back in mid-April when he had hit, 4 or 5 home runs in the first 2 weeks of the season, and you were asking me, I remember the question vividly, you asked, is Trey Mancini an everyday player in the major leagues? And we said, well, he's off to a heck of a start, and I think the way he profiled, you thought, okay, at the very least, he looks like a platoon type who can hit left-handed pitching, and proved that last September when he got called up and hit a few home runs. But he's raked against right-handers, and eventually, guys start to adjust, and we saw him go through a couple spells earlier in the season where he'd have a 1 for 20 or something along those lines. But then what would happen? He'd bounce right back. And the thing that I like about him so much, and that makes me think that he can be a really solid major league contributor, is the fact that he has such good at bats. Doesn't walk a ton, but you see him have at bats where he gets down 0-2 and he doesn't mail it in. He battles back, works the count, takes a couple tough pitches.
You're going to have to earn a strikeout on him. He's not going to give it to you.
Yeah, I mean, he's had his fair share of strikeouts and everything. He's not a perfect player, but you see the wheels turning there. As much as we have talked so much about some of these guys in this lineup, some that are still here, guys that have come and gone over the last few years, we talk about guys not having a plan up there and just looking like they're swinging from their heels trying to hit a home run. And
well, look at Mark Reynolds, who's still in the league and actually doing okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you never could have convinced me 6-7 years ago he'd still be in the big leagues, right? I just thought, he 214 will become 186 and he'll be gone,
Sure.
But it really is amazing how guys adjust, right? Like to all of this, and where Machado is trying to adjust right now, and the league's trying to adjust to Mancini, and a guy like Scope feels like he's ahead of the pitchers at this point. Like there's a different level to what he's been able to do the last 3 months at his age that really feels sort of Alomarian, right? Like he might hit 50 doubles this year, and he might hit 30 home runs, and he might bat 300. I mean, he literally might do all of the above. Like I'm buying what Scope is selling me because I see him improving, and other guys, you don't expect that from Adam Jones, who's an established player. We all know the holes in his swing and the holes in his game. We haven't seen marked improvement, and in a guy like Mancini, he had to improve a hell of a lot just to get here, right? Let alone to be hitting 322 in the big leagues at this point.
Well, just think about what he was up against in the reality of signing Chris Davis to a 7-year deal last offseason. 2 off seasons ago now. This past offseason, they re-signed Mark Trumbo, and Mancini was in a position of, one, there's no position for you, so try to learn a corner outfield spot if you can do it. And there were lots of questions about his arm. And look, he's been playing first base now with Davis being on the shelf. It's not as though Trey Mancini looked graceful where you think he's going to become a really good outfielder, but he at least looked good enough that he wasn't going to kill you out there. And that's impressive for someone who'd never done it at the professional level.
Yeah, I saw Sherman Abando play.
Yeah, exactly. Randy Milligan, I can remember at spring training years ago when they acquired Glenn Davis, and it's not easy to do. I mean, it looks great when you're talking about off-season plans and you're putting stuff on paper and saying, yeah, move that guy to the outfield, or yeah, change that guy's position. Well, if you want to have good defense, you shouldn't be doing that, and you can't plan on that. So, as much as we'll talk about that long term with Trey Mancini and how ultimately where he settles in as far as a position, you love the offense, and you're right. I mean, if it weren't for Aaron Judge, and there's some other good rookies,
or Clark Judge for that matter. Let's throw him
right.
Too.
We'd be talking a lot about him as a potential Rookie of the Year candidate. I mean, that's how good he's been. I mean, he's hitting 320 for goodness sake, slugging just under 600. I mean, that's incredible. Again, I expect that to level off a little bit. I don't think you can put those kind of expectations and think that a guy's going to continue.
Dude, he will not hit 322.
Yeah,
he will not.
But at this point,
but he might hit 30 home runs.
I'm starting to think he could hit 280, and if he continues to have good at bats and do things like that. So it's just really good to see. And I'm glad you mentioned Scope because I don't think he's going to hit 295 this year. But what I really like seeing from him, when you look at his slash line, 295 average, a 352 on base percentage. What does that tell you? This is a guy who's starting to draw a few walks here and there. Not a lot. He's never going to be someone who walks 75 times. But
he might walk 50.
You're seeing some improvement there, and that's something that
if you had the right guy batting behind him, and there was productivity there, and they had to, they're going to have to pitch him differently because he's dangerous, man. He's the most dangerous guy in the lineup for me because at any point he'll hit a double, and it will get a good at bat, and we'll draw a walk, and we'll make contact. I like the way he's improved, and I don't know what the level of that is for Machado if Machado's gone and whether they really want to build this franchise around these two guys. Yeah. But they better not let both of them go. You know what I mean? Sure. And I don't know that Scope coming off a year like this is going to take financial security and give him 2 extra years back at $18 million a year. So I don't know, but it certainly would be a good time to try that, right? I mean, you need him around, and you need him around long term, especially if Machado's not going to be here.
Yeah, I mean, he's the guy. He's in that range now over the next 6 months to a year where if you want to get something done long term with him, you better do it now. Unless you're going to roll the dice and see if you can do it when he hits the market, which, to their credit, they've re-signed some guys when they've gone to the market. But
I don't think it makes Machado give him a hometown deal because his heart's breaking about playing with Jonathan Scope. But it might go the other way around. I mean, it might keep I don't know. I mean, what their plans are with Machado and what Machado really gets in the open market, dude, that's between $150 and $400 million, depending on who you ask which day. And to Mr. Angelos, that's a lot of money.
Oh, that's a lot of money to anyone. I mean, that's a huge.
But I'm saying it's a lot of money of a difference between. Sure. In our mind, us throwing $300 and $400 million around, and there actually being a Yankees or a Phillies that's going to give him $285 million. I mean, I don't think Angelos is going to do that, but the jury's out as to whether someone else will do that too, because we've talked about it a lot, but then someone actually has to go and do it, right?
Right, and that's why it's so volatile. That's why you've seen so many teams at least attempt to lock up their young stars. Now, in some cases, it's successful. And, I mean, you look at the deal that Trout signed now compared to what Harper or Machado are going to get here in the next couple of years. But it's so fascinating to see how that all plays out. But just getting back to Scope and Mancini. I mean, as much as you talk about some of these other older guys who haven't performed at the level that you would expect, and specifically talking Davis before he got hurt and Trumbo. You need some of these. That's why we always talk about young, controllable talent. That's why it is so incredibly valuable in baseball, because we've seen it so many times, and not just with the Orioles. This is with any team, and the Yankees have dealt with a ton of this over the last decade, really. You end up paying these veterans for what they've already done in their career rather than what they're going to give you, and that's just the volatility. That's the reality of free agency, and it's really that case in any sport, but with baseball being everything's rock solid guaranteed, you're stuck. That's why you need to have these young, controllable talents that really are, I mean, that's where you get all your value. I mean, you can talk all you want about $200 million payrolls. The best teams out there have some young, controllable players who are giving you production that's worth a $150 million contract, and it's pennies on the dollar the first few years, basically. Before they even get into arbitration. So, I mean, it's been good to see. Certainly, we'll see what happens with Mancini as he gets into closer to his first full season in the majors being complete. But with Scope, it's been refreshing seeing some of the improvement he's made. And again, he'll go through some tough spells because he's still, just because he's drawing more walks doesn't mean he draws a lot of walks. It's just he's improved in that way. And last year I can remember talking to you about him and saying, well, he walks way less frequently than even Adam Jones, and now we're seeing him make some strides there. It's been really good to see, and I mean, really, and it's a little bit different now. Scope's been hitting higher in the order. They've had him hitting third. Saw him hitting third over the weekend. Mancini's been hitting fifth or sixth pretty consistently for a while now. But you do kind of look at it and you think, regardless of what happens with their pending free agents in the next year or two, but you think to 2019, 2020, that range, you're looking at, you're hoping if you can, if you can't keep Machado, you're hoping you can keep Scope around long term, and then having Mancini under control for another 5 years. That might be the heart of their order right there. And then you're talking about other guys like, Chris Davis being a little more complimentary, as much as that pains you to say that, considering what he's going to be making. But when you have good young players, that's where it gives you more hope for the future, even though we've talked at such lengths about this team's proverbial window slamming shut at the end of next year, regardless of what happens on-field results between now and then.
He is Luke Jones. You can find him at Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. Luke, a little look forward here to the Toronto Blue Jays, who are similarly sort of pretending and scuffling after being horrific at the beginning of the year. They've been not so good lately, and we're going to see some familiar names in B. Genie and Stroman and Happ here before it's all over with. But if I would have told you that the Blue Jays and like Jay Happ was working on 2 victories here toward the end of June, you probably would say that the Blue Jays have been struggling. And in a year after they lost Encarnacion, you'd say, well, maybe the Blue Jays would be struggling, but this has been an epic struggle for them as well as the Red Sox and the Yankees really try to put some real estate between them and everyone else. And I'm not a guy that is not a believer in Tampa. I'd say over the weekend, maybe not all that representative, although they've been decent. But we're really starting to separate this thing out, and we're seeing a version of the Blue Jays here that is similarly beleaguered like the Orioles after the last 2 or 3 years, these two teams being among the more dominant teams in the division.
Yeah, and you just think back to what happened last year with Toronto, with their starting rotation being so good. And on paper, going into it, not really thinking that it would be that good. You know, I mean, Jay Happ.
Dude, I thought the Jay Happ thing was crazy last year. That was unsustainable, right?
They signed him to that deal. Remember, he had gone to Pittsburgh, and Searage, their great pitching coach, had kind of straightened him out. You know, he gets the deal in Toronto, and you're thinking, okay, is he going to be the guy that he was in the second half of the previous year, or is he going to be the sub-4, sub-4.5 starting pitcher that he's been for most of his career? And he wasn't last year, but you look at what he's done this year, and let's keep in mind, a big part of the narrative for Toronto has just been injuries, specifically to that rotation. I mean, Stroman and Estrada are their only 2 starters that have pitched more than 90 innings, and everyone else is in that 25 to 50 range. Whether you're talking about Liriano,
Sanchez.
Sanchez, I mean, that's been a big loss for them as far as him not being out there. And, they, like most teams, they don't have great starting pitching depth. And that's, even some of the top rotations in the league get a couple injuries and things really go sideways for you. So, I mean, it's, like I said, you give Toronto a lot of credit for the way that they were able to dig out from that absolute, they completely buried themselves over the first 3.5, 4 weeks of the season. And they climbed back to right around 500, but you haven't seen, they plateaued, and they haven't gone anywhere since then. And that makes you think, well, maybe they were kind of seeking their level to be a 500 club, and that's kind of what they've been since the first 3 weeks. Like I said, you give them credit for bouncing back, but they have a minus 22 run differential. We've talked about the Orioles' run differential, which has really been skewed big time by the last 3 weeks especially, but even before that wasn't exactly looking like a team that was going to take off at some point. It's just, they've been the 2 teams that have kind of just been kind of languishing, and the Orioles have struggled big time here, but Toronto's just been mediocre for about the last month since they kind of looked like they were coming on. So,
well, the Orioles story now mirrors them with injuries. Well, if you would have said with the Orioles, well, no Hardy, and he'll stink, and then he'll get hurt. Davis will stink, and then he'll get hurt. Britton won't go to the post. Tillman will pitch and pitch horribly because he's either injured or was injured, and O'Day will be unavailable. I mean, that sort of mirrors where Toronto has been from an injury standpoint, right?
And it does, specifically when you talk about the pitching. I mean, both of these teams have had, with their lineups and position players, I mean, that's fine. But Toronto's starting rotation, knowing how critical it was to their success last year, and the Orioles, knowing how critical their bullpen was to their success, not just last year, but the 4 years prior to that, and then seeing what's happened, it makes it less surprising that these teams have struggled. Really, as much as you don't want to make excuses, but if you don't have Zach Britton, that's a big deal. For the Blue Jays, if you don't have Sanchez and some of their other pitchers have missed time, that's a big deal.
Or if Liriano's going to stink, it's a big deal.
Estrada's been a disappointment for them. His ERA just below 5. So, it's just it's been a whole lot of meh. And then when you take into account with Toronto that losing Edwin Encarnacion, which from a big picture standpoint, I could understand them not wanting to give a 34, 35-year-old player that kind of money over multi-years, but you got to replace them then. And that's where the struggle lies. And Donaldson's missed so much time, and Batista was so horrendous for what? The first 6 weeks he was as bad as anyone in baseball, really. So, you have that happen, it's going to add up. Tulowitzki, you just go down the list, the big boppers that they were counting on to make up for Encarnacion's departure, they haven't been there, or they haven't performed. So, fortunately for them, they've had some other guys like Justin Smoke, who's been ridiculous, kind of realizing all that potential he had way back when he was one of the top prospects in baseball. If it weren't for a couple guys like that, I mean, they'd really be struggling. Him and Morales have really kind of saved them offensively while they've been missing some of their other big bats.
He is Luke Jones. You can find him at Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. We get a little off day, and the Orioles get back after it in Toronto on Tuesday night and make their way home this weekend again against Tampa Bay. And we'll see Bundy get after it on Friday with a little extra day thrown in there. Gausman, Miley, and allegedly Jimenez. And Luke, I've saved the best for last here with the Jimenez conversation. Are they really going to give him the ball Thursday night?
At this point, I mean, it's a big shoulder shrug. And
I've asked that before, by the way.
If we're going to talk about Ubaldo Jimenez, we got to talk about Chris Tillman at this point. I mean, when you're talking about two guys who have ERAs that are so far below even bad. I mean,
by the way, everyone was making excuses for Tillman on Sunday like it was markedly better. I thought it was.
I thought he made some good pitches.
Dude, the first two innings, it could have been 5-0, though, right?
No doubt. And that's where I'm kind of at this point. You got to put it together. I mean, it's like I talked to you about how I thought Gausman looked better his last time out. He ran into trouble in the fifth inning, and the final stats then didn't look so good. But then you have to build on that, because I remember back in the White Sox series in Chicago, I thought Tillman, he had a rough ending to that outing, but I actually thought he looked much, much more like Chris Tillman. And then what happened? His next start, he wasn't even competitive.
Dude, let me just put it to you this way. When we sit here and I get lulled to sleep by the, I don't want to be mean, but Jim Hunter and Mike Bordick, I mean, I can't think of anything as an intelligent baseball fan who's watched the game for almost 50 years to want to pull my eyes out than to hear them make excuses for Chris Tillman on a day when he went 4 1/3 in 92 pitches and threw 34 balls in 92 pitches and took an ERA from 8.06 to 8.39. He took the hill with an ERA of 8, raised it, and the manager after the game says, well, I saw some good things from Chris. Really, Buck? What did you see? The 10 base runners in 4 1/3, the struggles he had in the first and second inning where he escaped like Houdini, or the part where he left the game allegedly giving them a chance to win, but did he really? Because he couldn't even have been the winning pitcher. So, when they make excuses for an 8 ERA going to 8.5, I can't imagine what you can't make an excuse for if you can make an excuse for that in June. And if it's injury, fine, then don't have him pitch. But, this is not. There was not a good effort on. They won. That's the good news. The good news is a bunch of the bats heated up in the 8th and 9th inning, and they hit the ball off a beaten up bullpen. It's not very good either. But to say to your point, Tillman or Jimenez, I don't know. I mean, I don't see much hope. If you give them the ball 5 more times, each of them, how many chances in those 10 games are you going to have to win? Not many.
Yeah, and that's where it's tough. I mean, as far as to address what you said, Buck Showalter, his previous start, did not sugarcoat things. I mean, it's one of those things where and what announcers say, I don't really care. And I'm not saying that to be disrespectful to anyone. I don't really care what a play-by-play announcer says, but the manager saying it, it comes down to this: Buck's not going to throw anyone under the bus publicly. What he's saying behind closed doors is different. And even his last, Tillman's last start in Baltimore, where he was just horrendous, Buck flat out said he has to be better than that. And he said Chris Tillman knows that he can't have an 8 ERA for us much longer. And, it basically said, if we need to make an adjustment, we will. And, the problem is, though, and as much as it sounds so flippant, because you can say anyone, but we've seen all these guys come up from the minor leagues, all of them. And, other than Jason Aquino is probably the one guy that you can point to at AAA that might be a starting option, that might be able to give them mediocrity. But it just comes down to, it's great to, look, I'm with you. Neither one of those guys should be in the rotation right now, the way they performed. But who pitches? It just comes down to, and this is where we've talked, where they got into this absolute, tailspin, is to put it mildly, to put it kindly, when you have all these bullpen arms and all these guys shuttling up from Norfolk and someone sent back, and the cycle goes on and on. They're so concerned with even just having enough pitching just to cover them so they don't have to blow out guys' arms.
Yeah, Bucks is trying to get to 11 o'clock tonight,
right?
Literally.
I mean, that's what it comes down to. So in the case of Tillman, I mean, do you give him a couple more starts until the All-Star break and see what happens in those 2 starts, and then you try to adjust then, and maybe you make a change at that point? And
boy, the bubblegum card's getting uglier and uglier, though.
Oh, I know. I mean, it's horrendous. I mean, this is I can't recall anything like this since Brian Mattis back in 2011, where he ended up back in the minor leagues.
By the way, Gosman's got a 6.5, and he got a whip of about 2. So right,
and that's why I said, and I even wrote about him at the end of last week. At WNST.net, there were lots of good signs from what he did, but he's got to build on it, because otherwise it's just an aberration, and then you just say, well, even bad pitchers pitch well sometimes. So the heat's on him, but the heat's especially on 2 guys who are veterans, who are both only under contract through the end of this season. And I mean, forget about next year or anything like that. I mean, look, I love Chris Tillman. I feel for him, because to me, he's either not healthy or he's had to adjust the way he pitches to keep himself healthy. Either way, it's not working, and I feel for him. Clearly you feel for the Orioles, because it's this is a guy they were counting on.
I feel for me every 5th day having to watch it.
But it just comes down to it that when does it end? What's the solution? Do you put him in the bullpen? Do you finally put him in a close the door and have a closed door meeting in Buck's office, and he acknowledges my shoulder's not right? Do you take the lengths of having to DFA him at some point here over the next month or 2? I mean, that's how bad this has been. I mean, that's something that would have been unheard of to suggest something like that in spring training. But he's beyond. You can't use this is spring training mode for him anymore. I mean, he's had plenty of work now. He's been pitching consistently in this rotation since early May. He's 2 months into his regular season, and he had a lengthy rehab assignment too. And by the way, he didn't pitch well at all during that either. So as much as you try to grasp at some straws to see Tillman, and he made a couple good pitches at times on Sunday, but you can't just cherry pick that and then ignore everything that has just looked awful. And I feel for the guy, because again, I don't think it's a case where Chris Tillman just completely lost all ability to pitch just because. I think it all stems from the shoulder, and either he's hurt or he's had to completely alter the way he pitches to avoid getting hurt again, and it's just not working. And you can't. It's getting harder and harder to justify it, even with the lack of any palatable options at AAA right now. But I mean, if something doesn't change here dramatically very, very soon, I don't know how it can continue like this. And for him personally, you feel for him, because he's going to be a free agent at the end of the year, and forget about whether Orioles or not. I mean, this guy's got to worry about even getting a job somewhere, even a 1-year pillow contract somewhere at this point, because he's kind of in that territory where he might have to be taking a minor league deal and an invite to spring training. I mean, that's how bad he's been.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. You can follow him during Orioles games anytime at WNST.net or at Baltimore Luke. And you can find us out in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault all week long. We're mixing some NFL, some NBA, a little TJ Oshie, and the Caps updates going on here as well. And all of that available in the WNST morning newspaper. That's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com as well. It's still $10 a month, even though it's summertime. There's one right around the corner, and air conditioning there. Get you in perfect shape here this summer, get you healthier, and on your way with the Lunk Alarm there as well. Any breaking news, and there's always breaking news if you're an Orioles fan, because there's always the Norfolk Shuttle. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. You'll get that news first on the WNST text service. And, of course, Dennis will be here on Thursday driving you home, getting you ready for the parades. And let's see, the corn on the cob, which I had some of Sunday, which was outstanding. Burgers, dogs, barbecue, Heritage Fair, rock and roll, flags, parades, all that good stuff, fireworks, all coming up this week. Dennis will have you ready for that on the SSV on WNST. Nasty at WNST.net finds me, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and, of course, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. The Peter Principles Chapter 7 now available out at WNST.net. I've been tweeting that out. It is the Ray Miller, Albert Bell, Frank Wren era. Ah, yes, I remember Sid Thrift well. It's all out at WNST.net right now. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.